I didn't think about my family. I didn't think about my son. I didn't even think I might die. My last important thought was humiliatingly small. Who's going to cover my meetings? Like the worst thing in the world would be a blank space on a calendar. Like my job was the real heart keeping everything alive. The morning was plain and cold, the kind of cold that makes the air feel sharp when it hits the back of your throat. I carried the trash out like I'd done 1,000 times, stepping onto the driveway with my shoulders slightly hunched, half awake, already mentally inside my inbox. My phone was in my hand because it was always in my hand, and even as I walked I was doing that compulsive little thumb flick, checking, refreshing, making sure nothing was piling up without me. Then something shifted inside my chest. Not a stabbing pain, not a dramatic jolt, more like a heavy pressure that arrived quietly and stayed. My first reaction wasn't fear. It was irritation. Seriously? Not today. I tried to take a deeper breath and realized the breath didn't go where it usually went. The air felt thick, as if my lungs were working against a damp blanket. My legs went weak in a way that didn't feel like fatigue. It felt like my body had stopped taking instructions. The driveway under my shoes seemed to tilt, the world narrowing at the edges like someone slowly closing a door. Just picture it for a moment. You're a few steps from your own front door, your whole life right behind it. Warm kitchen, familiar noise, people you love, and suddenly you can't do the simplest thing your body has done every day without permission. You can't stand. You can't steady yourself. You can't decide how you're going to land. I didn't fall like in the movies. I just lost control. And the scariest part wasn't the collapse. It was realizing, in that split second, how long I'd been living like control was guaranteed. Before that morning, I lived as if I had an endless supply of later. Later I'd sleep. Later I'd get checked out. Later I'd stop snapping at people I loved over nothing. Later I'd show up fully, without my phone hovering like a third person at the table. Later I'd say the simple things out loud. I'm proud of you. I'm sorry. I love you. Instead of assuming my family could somehow read it off my schedule. I was in my mid-40s, an operations manager, and that title sounds sturdy until you understand what it turned into in my head, a personality. I wasn't just a guy with a job. I was the reliable one, the one who answered fast, the one who fixed problems, the one who made sure nothing fell through the cracks. I built my sense of worth around being needed, and the more people leaned on me, the more I mistook that pressure for meaning. My days ran on caffeine and urgency. I woke up already behind, already scanning messages, already calculating what I had to squeeze in. I ate lunch at my desk like it was proof of discipline. I called my short temper efficiency. I called the constant tightness in my chest stress. I convinced myself that if I just pushed through this quarter, this project, this deadline, things would calm down and I'd become the version of myself my family deserved. At home, the costs showed up in small, quiet ways that were easy to ignore because they didn't look like explosions. They looked like delays. Half listening. A distracted hum while my eyes stayed on a screen. My teenage son would ask if I could watch a school presentation or help him with something simple, and I'd say, yeah, 5 minutes, without looking up. 5 minutes became 20. 20 became an hour. Sometimes it became nothing at all. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to be patient with strangers and sharp with the people who will forgive you? Have you ever answered a work message faster than you answered someone you love, and then told yourself it didn't mean anything? I told myself my family understood. I told myself love didn't need constant maintenance. I told myself I was doing it all for them. But if I'm being honest, there was a darker truth under that story. I liked being the guy who held everything together. And I didn't realize that while I was busy proving I was reliable, I was slowly becoming emotionally unavailable in the one place reliability actually mattered. The scary thing about the decline is how reasonable it feels while it's happening. It doesn't arrive with sirens. It arrives like background noise you learn to tune out. For weeks, maybe longer, if I'm honest, I'd had little warnings that didn't fit the story I told about myself. A tightness in my chest that showed up in the evenings, right when the house finally went quiet and I was supposed to relax. A restless kind of sleep where I'd wake up at 3 a.m. with my mind already sprinting through tomorrow's problems, my heart thumping like it was late for something. Moments at work where I'd stand up too fast and feel a quick wave of lightheadedness, and I'd laugh it off like it was nothing. I called all of it stress. Stress was my favorite explanation because it let me stay in control. Stress sounded temporary. Stress sounded like a badge. Stress didn't require me to admit that my body might be making a serious complaint. There were days I'd get to my car after work and just sit there, hand on the steering wheel, taking shallow breaths without realizing I was doing it. Not pain. Exactly. More like my chest couldn't fully expand, like there was a tight belt wrapped around the inside of me. I'd tell myself I was out of shape. I'd promise I'd start walking again. I'd open my phone, answer 3 messages, and forget I'd ever made the promise. The quarter was closing. That became my excuse for everything. I had reports due, a staffing issue that wouldn't resolve, vendors who couldn't meet deadlines, and a boss who loved the phrase circle back like it was a prayer. In that environment, going to a doctor felt like weakness, not in a dramatic macho way, more in the way that felt practical. If I left for an appointment, the machine would jam. If the machine jammed, I'd have to clean it up later. So I kept moving, pretending motion was the same thing as health. At home, the symptoms turned me into a worse version of myself. I was more irritable, more impatient, quicker to sigh when my son tried to talk to me at the end of the day. I'd hear him start a story from the living room, something about school or a friend or a coach, and my first instinct wasn't curiosity. It was calculation. How long is this going to take? What else do I still need to do? I hate admitting that, but it's true. And the worst part is I knew, somewhere deep down, that something was off. There were moments when the fear broke through, small flashes, like a crack in a wall. Standing at the kitchen counter, I'd suddenly feel my pulse loud in my ears, and I'd think, this isn't normal. Driving on the highway, I'd feel that tight pressure again and imagine, for 1/6 second, what it would be like to lose control behind the wheel. Have you ever ignored something important because acknowledging it would force you to change your life? Have you ever felt your body whispering a warning and then turned the volume down because you didn't like what it was saying? I almost told my wife once. I walked into the bedroom while she was folding laundry, opened my mouth, and then swallowed it back because I didn't want to worry her. Or maybe I didn't want to hear her say what I already suspected, that I needed help, that I needed to stop pretending, that this wasn't just a rough season. So I did what I always did. I minimized. I pushed through. I answered emails. And my body kept a quiet record of all the times I chose productivity over honesty. That morning didn't feel like a turning point while it was beginning. It felt like every other morning I'd been muscling my way through. It was cold enough that the air stung, and the driveway had that faint, gritty frost you can't always see until your shoes squeak a little. Inside the house, I'd been moving on autopilot. Coffee, a quick glance at my phone, a mental list of who I needed to follow up with before noon. My wife was in the kitchen, hair pulled back, already doing the quiet work of the day. My son was still upstairs, and I remember thinking I should go knock on his door and tell him I'd drive him later if he needed it. I remember thinking it in the same way you think. I should drink more water. A vague good intention that never becomes an action. I grabbed the trash bag from under the sink. It was heavier than I expected. Leftovers, packaging, the weight of a normal household. I tied it too tight, as if the knot mattered. Then I stepped into the garage, hit the button, and watched the door roll up with that familiar mechanical groan. The cold came in immediately, brisk and clean, making the garage feel like an outdoor space. I walked toward the bins, and my phone buzzed. Of course it buzzed. I glanced down out of habit. It was an email thread, one of those chains where a dozen people were copying each other to feel productive. The subject line had the word urgent in it, which should have been a joke by then, but my body reacted like it always did, a subtle tightening, a readiness to respond. My thumb hovered to type. I was already composing a reply in my head, and then I felt the pressure in my chest return, stronger than it had been before. Not sharp, not cinematic, just heavy, like something thick and dense had settled right behind my breastbone. I paused, almost annoyed, and tried to take a deeper breath. The breath didn't satisfy. It was like inhaling didn't reach the place it was supposed to reach. My heart sped up, not in a clean, athletic way, but in a jittery, frantic way that made the pulse in my neck feel too loud. I took 2 more steps, and the world tilted. It wasn't a spin like dizziness from standing too fast. It was a slow slide, as if the ground was no longer flat. My left hand reached out automatically, searching for something solid. Air, a car hood, the bin, anything. The trash bag sagged in my right hand, and I could feel my grip weakening even though my brain was telling my fingers to hold on. My first thought was ridiculous. Don't fall in a way that looks stupid. I wish I could say my first thought was my family. I wish I could say I immediately understood what was happening. I didn't. I was still trying to manage the optics of my own collapse. That's how deeply I'd trained myself to stay composed, to stay functional, to keep the machine running even when the machine was breaking. My knees buckled. My body dropped faster than my mind could catch up. The driveway hit me hard, and the cold of it shocked me more than the impact. My cheeks scraped against rough concrete. Tiny stones pressed into my skin. My breath came in shallow, panicked pulls that didn't fill me. The trash bag had rolled a few feet away, a stupid black shape on pale gray cement, and my phone was still in my hand, buzzing like nothing had changed. I tried to push myself up, and my arms barely responded. That's when fear finally arrived, not as panic, but as a clean, terrifying understanding. I can't make my body do what I'm telling it to do. The sky above me looked too bright, washed out. My vision narrowed at the edges, darkening like someone was slowly pulling curtains inward. Sound became strange. I could hear the faint hum of the garage door motor settling. I could hear a distant car pass on the street. But the most important sounds, my own breathing, my own voice, felt far away, like they belonged to someone else. I tried to call out, and what came out was weak, unfinished. Then I heard the door from the house. Footsteps. Fast. A sharp intake of breath. My wife's voice hit the air, but it didn't land in my ears normally. It arrived warped and distant, like it had to travel through water. I saw her shape above me, her face suddenly drained of color. Her hands moved in quick, uncertain motions, reaching, hovering, not knowing where to touch, without making it worse. I wanted to tell her I was fine. That's what my mouth tried to form. The old reflex. The lie that had kept me going for years. But my tongue felt thick. My jaw barely moved. And my chest felt like it was being held down by something that didn't care what I wanted. I remember her yelling for our son. I remember my son's footsteps pounding down the stairs inside the house. Then the sudden silence that comes right before someone sees something that changes them. I couldn't turn my head fully, but I caught a glimpse of him at the edge of my vision, standing in the doorway, frozen. His face wasn't the bored teenage face I'd gotten used to. It was open, raw, confused, like his brain couldn't accept the picture in front of him. And then, because the universe has a cruel sense of timing, my phone buzzed again. Another email. Another urgent subject line. Another tiny demand for my attention. My wife's hand closed over mine, hard, as if she could keep me tethered to the world through my fingers. I felt her shaking. I saw her fumble for her own phone, heard her voice sharpen as she spoke to someone. 911, I assumed. Her words fast and clipped the way people talk when they're trying not to fall apart. I tried to focus on her face, to give her something, eye contact, reassurance, anything, but my eyes wouldn't cooperate. My vision tunneled. The edges went dark. The center blurred. The cold of the driveway seeped into my back and shoulders, and my breathing sounded wrong, thin and wet. And right before everything slipped away, the last clear thought I had wasn't spiritual or profound. It was still logistical. Who's going to cover my meetings? Then the world folded inward, and even that thought dissolved. What happened after I faded out wasn't a tunnel, or a light, or anything you could put into a neat story for other people. There was no moment where I watched my life, like a movie. There wasn't even a clear line between awake and not awake. It felt more like being pulled under a surface you didn't know was there, like the world kept moving above you, but you couldn't reach it. At first, it was mostly sensation without context. A heavy sinking, like my body was made of wet clothes. The idea of time stopped making sense. It wasn't blackness exactly, because there were fragments, brief flashes that didn't connect, like someone shuffling through photos too fast. Then the sound started. Not clear sounds, more like impressions of sound. A voice saying my name in a way that didn't feel professional or distant. My name, stretched with fear. The kind of voice that tries to stay steady and fails. Another voice, lower, faster, giving instructions. A rhythm that might have been footsteps, or a gurney rolling, or my own pulse amplified by panic. And underneath all of it, like a thread I couldn't break, was a single looped memory. My son standing in the kitchen a few weeks earlier, asking if I would watch something of his, some school presentation, something he was nervous about, and me answering without looking up. The words I'd used were casual, almost lazy. Yeah, in a bit. 5 minutes. After I finished this. In that inner space, I couldn't hide behind excuses. I couldn't tell myself I was providing. I couldn't reframe it as just a busy season. The memory didn't play like a scene with dialogue. It played like a feeling, his hope lifting when he asked, then sagging when I delayed, then hardening into that quiet teenage mask he wore when he didn't want to look like he cared too much. Just picture this for a moment. You're trapped in your own body, and the only thing your mind can reach is the exact moment you chose something trivial over someone who loved you. Not one dramatic betrayal, just 1,000 small dismissals that add up to a life you didn't mean to build. That's when fear became something sharper than panic. Panic is loud and messy. This was clean. This was the realization that I might not get to fix it. The worst part wasn't the thought of death as an abstract thing. The worst part was the thought of unfinished, unsaid, unexplained. Like I'd been walking around assuming love was understood without being spoken, and now the bill was due. Another memory surfaced. My wife at the dinner table, trying to tell me something about her day, and me nodding while my eyes kept drifting down to a screen. I could feel the weight of her patience in that memory, the way she kept talking anyway, the way she kept trying to include me even when I wasn't really there. In that inner space, I finally saw what I'd trained her to expect, a husband whose body sat in the chair, while his attention lived somewhere else. Have you ever had a moment where you suddenly see yourself the way other people have been seeing you for a long time? Not the version you intend to be, but the version your habits have created? I wanted to go back, not to redo my whole life in some dramatic way, but to do something embarrassingly simple. To sit at the table and actually listen. To look my son in the face and stay there. To tell my wife, without multitasking, that I knew she'd been carrying more than I admitted. To say thank you in a way that wasn't rushed. And there was this strange bitterness that rose up too. Anger at my own body, at the timing, at the unfairness of collapsing during a normal chore. A part of me wanted to argue with reality like it was a manager who'd made a bad decision. This can't happen right now. I don't have time for this. But almost immediately, that anger collapsed into shame because I realized how ridiculous it was. I'd been brave about the wrong things. Brave about deadlines. Brave about stress. Brave about being the guy who could handle anything. Meanwhile, I'd been cowardly about the one thing that actually takes courage. Being present, being honest, slowing down enough to feel what matters. Somewhere far away, the world intruded again. A pressure against my chest that felt external, not like the heaviness I'd felt before, like someone was doing something to me, trying to pull me back. A voice counting, maybe. Another voice saying my name again, firm this time, like an anchor. The memory loops stuttered and broke. And in that broken space, one thought landed with a kind of calm that scared me more than the panic had. If this is it, the last thing I worried about was email. Not because email is evil, not because work doesn't matter, but because in the face of losing everything, my priorities showed themselves without permission. I don't know how long that lasted. I don't know what parts were seconds and what parts were my brain trying to make sense of chaos. I only know that when the inner space began to thin, when the distant voices sharpened, when the pressure and movement became more real, there was one desperate feeling underneath everything. Please let me go back. Please let me say it out loud. Please let me be different while it still counts. Coming back wasn't a single moment. It was layers. At first, there was only discomfort, dryness so deep it felt like my throat had been lined with paper. My mouth wouldn't swallow right. My tongue felt too big for my own teeth. I tried to move and nothing happened, which sent a flicker of panic through me. But even panic felt slow, as if my body was running on low power. Then light. Harsh. White light that didn't belong to morning or evening. Light that comes from ceilings and doesn't care about your eyes. I tried to blink and my eyelids felt heavy, sticky, like they were glued at the edges. Sound arrived in pieces, a steady electronic beeping, the faint hiss of air, the soft clatter of something metal being set down, distant voices that sounded like they were speaking through a wall. The first clear thing I recognized was not a person. It was a rhythm, a monitor, steady but insistent, marking time in a way my own brain couldn't. That sound, beep, 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 was like someone counting for me, proving that I was still here. I tried to turn my head, and the world swayed. My neck felt weak, like it didn't belong to me. Something tugged at my arm when I moved, and a dull ache radiated from my chest and shoulders. It wasn't sharp pain, but it was soreness in a way that suggested effort had happened while I was gone. My mind didn't know the details, but my body did. A nurse noticed my eyes. She leaned in close enough that her face filled my vision. Her expression was calm, practiced, gentle in the way you learn to be when people wake up scared. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. She told me where I was. She told me to breathe slowly. She told me I'd had a cardiac event, that I was in the ICU, that I was alive. Alive. The word hit like a wave. I tried to speak and nothing came out but a rasp. My throat rebelled. My lips felt cracked. My voice sounded unfamiliar, thin and broken like it belonged to someone older. And then I saw my wife. She was sitting in a chair pulled up too close to the bed, like distance itself was dangerous. Her hair looked like she'd tied it back in a hurry. Her eyes were red, but not in a dramatic way, red in a tired way, as if she'd been crying in private and then wiping it away so she could keep functioning. Her hands were on the blanket, smoothing it with tiny, repetitive movements, like the blanket was a task she could complete correctly if she just did it enough. When she realized I was looking at her, her face changed in an instant. Relief, shock, fear, everything piled together without permission. She leaned forward and grabbed my hand, and I felt how much she was shaking. Not a little tremble. Full body shaking that she'd been holding back until the second she knew I could see her. My son was behind her, half in the doorway, like he didn't know if he was allowed to come closer. He looked different to me in that moment. Not because he'd changed overnight, but because I finally saw him without distraction. His face was pale. His jaw was tight. His eyes were wet, but he wasn't letting the tears fall. He was trying to be fine, the way I had trained him to be when feelings got inconvenient. Have you ever seen your child trying to stay quiet with their fear, not because they don't feel it, but because they're trying to protect you? Have you ever realized, too late, that they learned that from watching you? I tried to say his name. It came out wrong, a rough whisper. But his shoulders dropped anyway, like hearing me attempt it was enough to crack something open. He stepped closer, just one step, like he was testing reality. My wife leaned in, and her voice broke when she spoke. She didn't give me a speech. She didn't scold me. She just kept saying my name under her breath like she needed to repeat it to keep me from disappearing again. I wanted to apologize immediately. I wanted to empty my chest of every regret. But I couldn't perform anything. I couldn't be polished. I couldn't optimize the moment. I could barely keep my eyes open. And in that weakness, something honest happened. For the first time in years, my family had my full attention because I had no strength left to give it to anyone else. Recovery didn't feel heroic. It felt humbling. The first time they helped me sit up, I expected it to be uncomfortable in a normal way, like sore muscles after a workout. Instead, it was shocking how hard it was to simply exist upright. My body shook with the effort. My vision blurred at the edges. Sweat broke out on my forehead like I'd run a mile, and all I'd done was move from horizontal to slightly less horizontal. When they stood me up for the first short walk, I learned something that stayed with me. Confidence is fragile when your body stops cooperating. I put my feet on the floor, and they didn't feel like my feet. They felt distant, delayed, like there was a lag between intention and motion. I took one step, then another, and each step was a negotiation. My pride wanted to pretend it was nothing. My body refused to participate in that lie. Somewhere in that slow, humiliating progress, gratitude started showing up in odd places. Not in big inspirational speeches, just in tiny moments I'd never noticed before. The feeling of water going down my throat without pain. The warmth of sunlight through the hospital window. The simple fact that my heart kept going without me forcing it. Cardiac rehab came later, and that's where the change became real, not just physical, but internal. Rehab was structured, measured, boring in the way real improvement often is. Treadmill at a pace that felt embarrassingly slow. A nurse watching numbers while I learned what my body could handle. Education sessions about warning signs that, in hindsight, I'd been collecting for weeks like I was building a case against myself. One of the doctors explained my odds in the calm voice of someone who has seen too much. He didn't dramatize it. He didn't try to scare me. He just said what happened and what could have happened. And hearing it delivered that way, clean, clinical, certain, made me realize how foolish my old idea of bravery had been. I had been brave about deadlines, brave about long hours, brave about ignoring discomfort, but I hadn't been brave enough to admit I needed help before it became an emergency. At home, The changes weren't perfect or immediate, and I want to be honest about that. I didn't come back as some enlightened saint who never checked his phone again. I came back as the same man, but cracked open. The first boundary I set was painfully simple. My phone stopped living in my hand. I bought a charger and left it in the kitchen, away from the couch, away from the bed. Not as a symbolic gesture, because symbolism is easy, but because I needed friction between my impulse and my action. If I wanted to check email, I had to stand up and walk to it, which gave my brain a few seconds to ask, is this actually urgent? Or are you just addicted to feeling needed? Have you ever noticed how often we reach for distraction not because we have to, but because stillness makes us feel exposed? I started eating at the table again. Really at the table. Not standing, not halfway turned toward a screen, not present in the technical sense. At first, it felt awkward, like I didn't know what to do with my hands without a device. Conversation wasn't optimized. There were pauses. Sometimes my son would talk, and I'd feel my brain try to drift toward problem-solving mode. And I'd have to drag myself back, consciously, like pulling a hand away from a hot surface. The hardest part was apologizing in a way that wasn't performative. I'd said sorry before, plenty of times, usually quickly, usually to smooth something over. This time I had to say it slowly, without defending myself, without turning it into a speech about how stressed I'd been. I sat with my wife one evening after my son went upstairs, and I told her the truth. I had been there, but not with them. I had treated our home like a place I passed through between work emergencies. I had assumed love would wait. She didn't cry dramatically. She just nodded, and I could see how tired she was, not only from the scare, but from years of carrying what I refused to look at. A few days later, my son caught me in the kitchen while I was making tea. He didn't give a big emotional monologue. That's not how he operates. He just said, quietly, that hearing my wife on the phone in the driveway had been the worst sound of his life. And then he surprised me by adding that he was angry at me for not taking care of myself. That's what finally made the apology real. Not my guilt, not my fear. His anger, because it meant I mattered. Try to imagine it. Your kid, who you assumed was fine, standing in front of you with wet eyes, not asking for money or rides or permission, but asking you, in the only way he can, to stop disappearing while you're still alive. From that point on, the change wasn't work less in some generic way. It was deeper. It was learning to speak love instead of assuming it. I still work. I still have deadlines. I still feel that old itch to prove I'm indispensable, because habits don't die just because you got scared. But now I recognize the difference between being useful and being present. I know how quickly a normal morning can become the moment your family remembers forever. I know how thin the line is between, I'll do it later, and I never got the chance. Sometimes I stand in the driveway where it happened, and I let myself feel it, not to punish myself, but to remember. The cold, the helplessness, the ridiculous thought about email. And then I walk back inside and I try, in small ways, to live like I actually understand what I almost lost. Have you ever wondered what your last ordinary moment would be? Not a dramatic ending, just a Tuesday morning, a trash bag, a phone buzzing in your hand. If you can, just picture that for a second, and ask yourself what you would wish you'd done differently before the world narrowed. The lesson I took from it isn't quit your job or become a new person overnight. It's quieter than that. It's this: love doesn't stay strong just because you assume it's there. Love is spoken. Love is attention. Love is showing up when nothing is on fire. If you still have someone you can call, or hug, or sit with at the table, do it while you can. Say one kind thing out loud today, even if it feels awkward. Not because you're trying to be inspirational, but because time is borrowed in ways we don't like to admit.